She was holding her boarding pass seat 1A. It was the only thing Brianna had held onto for 3 years of double shifts and missed holidays. But when a wealthy socialite pointed a manicured finger in her face and screamed, "Security! Remove this woman immediately," Brianna didn't yell back. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her purse and made one phone call. What happened in the next 10 minutes didn't just ground the plane. It ended a career, exposed a massive corporate cover-up, and left the entire flight crew in tears. You might think you know how this ends, but you have no idea who was really on the other end of that lie. The air inside JFK's Terminal 4 was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the frantic energy of holiday travel. Brianna Washington adjusted the strap of her modest canvas tote bag, her fingers brushing against the zipper to reassure herself that the documents were still there. Beside her, her 17-year-old daughter, Maya, was scrolling through her phone, though her knee bounced nervously. "You okay, Mom?" Maya asked, looking up. Her eyes, usually bright with teenage mischief, held a shadow of worry. She knew what this trip cost, not just in dollars, but in blood, sweat, and the cartilage in Brianna's knees. "I'm fine, baby," Brianna smiled, smoothing down her blazer. It was a nice blazer, bought specifically for this day from a terrifyingly expensive boutique in downtown Brooklyn, even though it was on clearance. Just ready to sit down. "My feet are singing the blues." "Bloth. Bread. Ruwit. They better have those hot towels you talked about," Maya teased. "If I don't get a hot towel, I'm walking back to New York." Brianna laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to cut through the sterile airport noise. "You'll get your towel. We earned this." They had. Brianna had spent 20 years as a head nurse at Mount Sinai, working the ICU through pandemics, blizzards, and staffing crises. This trip to London wasn't just a vacation, it was a pilgrimage. They were going to visit the grave of Maya's father, David, who had been buried in his hometown of Brixton. It was the first time they could afford to go since he passed away 5 years ago, and because Brianna wanted it to be perfect, she had done the unthinkable. She had cashed out a small inheritance from her late aunt to upgrade them to first class on Titan Airways Flight 402. Priority boarding for first class and Diamond Medallion members. The gate agent, a harried-looking man named Mr. Anderson, announced over the crackling PA system. Brianna took a deep breath. Showtime. They walked toward the gate. Brianna felt a familiar prickle of anxiety, the feeling of entering a space where people like her were often viewed with suspicion. She stood tall, holding her phone with the digital boarding pass displayed, seat 1A. Maya had 1B. As they scanned their passes and walked down the jet bridge, the transition was immediate. The chaos of the terminal faded into the hushed luxury of the first-class cabin. The seats were massive leather pods. Soft jazz was playing and the air smelled like lavender and expensive champagne. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, her eyes wide. "Mom, look at the legroom. I could live here." Brianna chuckled, stowing her tote in the overhead bin. She sat down in 1A, the leather cool and buttery against her back. A flight attendant, a young woman with a tight bun and a name tag reading Sarah, appeared instantly with a tray of crystal flutes. "Champagne or sparkling cider for the young lady?" Sarah asked with a practiced, if slightly exhausted smile. "Cider for her, champagne for me." "Please," Brianna said, accepting the glass. She took a sip. It tasted like victory. For 10 minutes, everything was perfect. Other passengers filed in, businessmen in charcoal suits who barely looked up from their iPads, a tech mogul in a hoodie who nodded politely at Brianna. The cabin was filling up. The doors were about to close. Then the storm arrived. It started with a cacking of heels, loud, aggressive staccato strikes against the floor of the jet bridge. A woman burst into the cabin, breathless and radiating fury. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a white designer tracksuit that probably cost more than Brianna's car. carrying a Louis Vuitton duffel bag that she swung recklessly, nearly hitting a seated passenger. This was Tiffany Van Doren, and she was not happy. "I don't care what the app says." Tiffany was screaming into her phone, not even bothering to lower it as she entered the hushed cabin. "I am a Titanium Elite member, Gerald. I demand you fix this. I am not sitting in row 4. I don't do bulkhead. I do 1A. That is my seat. It has always been my seat." She hung up the phone with a violent stab of her finger and looked around the cabin, her eyes scanning the rows like a predator looking for the weakest member of the herd. Her gaze swept past the businessmen, past the tech mogul, and landed squarely on Brianna. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Tiffany marched up to row 1. She stopped right in front of Brianna's pod, looming over her. Brianna, who had been looking out the window, turned to face her. "Excuse me," Tiffany said. Her voice wasn't asking a question, it was issuing an eviction notice. "You are in my seat." Brianna blinked, setting her champagne flute down on the coaster. She kept her voice calm, the same tone she used on delirious patients in the ICU. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me," Tiffany snapped, shifting her weight to one hip. "Seat 1A. I fly this route twice a month. I always sit in 1A. There has clearly been a mistake with the booking system, and they've double-booked us. But since I am a Titanium Elite member with over 2 million miles, and you are, well, clearly not, you're going to need to move." Maya in seat 1B pulled her headphones off, her jaw dropping. "Excuse me?" Brianna held up a hand to silence her daughter. She looked Tiffany in the eye. "Mom, I have a valid boarding pass for this seat. I paid for it. I suggest you check yours again." "I don't need to check anything." Tiffany's voice rose to a shriek, causing heads to turn throughout the cabin. "I know how this works. Airlines overbook. They put standby passengers in empty seats until the real owner shows up. Well, I'm here. So get your bag, take your little sparkling juice, and go back to economy where you belong." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. "I didn't upgrade from standby," Brianna said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. "I bought this ticket 3 months ago. I'm not moving." Tiffany let out a scoff of disbelief, turning her head to address the rest of the cabin as if looking for witnesses to a crime. "Can you believe this entitlement?" She spun around and snapped her fingers at Sarah, the flight attendant who was rushing over from the galley, looking panicked. "You," Tiffany pointed at Sarah. "Check her ticket, now." "She's stealing my seat." Sarah looked between the two women. She saw Tiffany Van Doren, a woman whose name was likely flagged in their system as a high-value customer, but also high maintenance. Then she saw Brianna calm, dignified, but undeniably out of place in the visual language of corporate first class. "Mom," Sarah said gently to Tiffany, "please lower your voice. Let me see your boarding pass." Tiffany shoved her phone into Sarah's face. "It says 4A, but that's wrong. Gerald from the concierge desk said he would fix it. It's supposed to be 1A. She is obviously a system glitch." Sarah looked at the phone, then turned to Brianna. "Mom, could I see your boarding pass, please?" Brianna unlocked her phone and held it out. Sarah scanned it. It beeped. "Valid. Seat 1A. "Mrs. Van Doren," Sarah said, trying to hand the phone back to Tiffany. "This passenger has a valid ticket for 1A. Your seat is 4A. It's a lovely seat, plenty of legroom. I don't want 4A. Tiffany screamed. She threw her bag onto the floor. "This is reverse discrimination." "That's what this is. You're letting her sit there just to fill some diversity quota, aren't you? While I spend $50,000 a year with this airline." The tech mogul in row 2 took off his headphones. The businessman stopped typing. The silence was deafening. "Mom, that is not," Sarah began, her face flushing red. "Don't lie to me." Tiffany leaned in close to Brianna, her expensive perfume smelling sour with aggression. "Listen to me. I have a meeting in London that is worth more than your entire life's earnings. I need to sleep. I cannot sleep in row 4. I am offering you a chance to save yourself some embarrassment. Move, now, or I will have security drag you off this plane for theft of services." Brianna didn't flinch. She looked at Tiffany's manicured hand, then up at her face, heavily made up to hide the lines of bitterness. "I am visiting my husband's grave," Brianna said quietly. "I haven't seen him in 5 years. I worked double shifts for 6 months to buy this seat so my daughter and I could grieve in peace. I am not moving for your meeting. I am not moving for your status. And I am certainly not moving because you think I don't belong here." Tiffany's face went a shade of purple that defied nature. She turned to Sarah. "Get the bus, Sarah. Get the captain. I want this plane held. I am not sitting down until this woman is removed." Sarah, trembling slightly, pressed the call button for the lead flight attendant. I'll get the purser, Miss Jenkins." A moment later, Miss Jenkins arrived. She was an older woman, hardened by decades of dealing with unruly passengers, but even she looked wary as she approached the scene. Tiffany immediately launched into her tirade, adding new accusations. Brianna had been aggressive. Brianna had threatened her. Brianna was drunk. "She's clearly intoxicated," Tiffany lied, pointing at the half-empty champagne flute. "It's a safety violation. I don't feel safe flying with her right behind the cockpit." Miss Jenkins turned to Brianna. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" "The only problem," Brianna said, her patience fraying like a rope under too much tension, "is that this woman is harassing me and my daughter. I want her off," Tiffany yelled. "If you don't remove her, I will call the CEO. I had his personal number. I will have your jobs." "Both of you." Miss Jenkins looked at the tablet in her hand. She saw Tiffany's status, Titanium Elite VIP. Then she looked at Brianna's status, General Member. It shouldn't have mattered, but in the corporate world of airlines it often did. Ms. Jenkins sighed, a sound of defeat. She leaned down to Brianna. Man," Jenkins whispered, "I am so sorry, but we have a situation here that is delaying the flight. Mrs. Van Doren is a very frequent flyer. To keep the peace, would you be willing to switch to her seat in 4A? I can offer you a voucher for future travel." Brianna looked at Miss Jenkins. The betrayal hit her harder than Tiffany's shouting. "You're asking me to move? I did nothing wrong." "I know," Miss Jenkins hissed, glancing nervously at Tiffany, who was tapping her foot triumphantly. "But the captain won't take off with the disturbance in the cabin. If we have to bring the gate agents back on, they might deplane everyone. It's easier if you just swap. Please." Brianna looked at Maya. Maya looked terrified, shrinking into her seat. "No," Brianna said. "No. I'm tired of easier. I am tired of moving to the back to make comfortable people more comfortable." "Fine," Tiffany yelled. "Captain, Captain." She began banging on the cockpit door. The door opened. Captain Miller, a man with silver hair and a stern expression, stepped out. "What is going on out here? This woman stole my seat and refuses to move." Tiffany pointed a shaking finger at Brianna. "And your staff is too incompetent to do anything about it." "Must." Captain Miller looked at the scene. He saw a screaming socialite and the quiet black woman sitting in 1A. He looked at his watch. They were already 10 minutes past departure time. "Ladies," Captain Miller said, his voice deep, "I don't care who sits where, but we need to leave. If you can't resolve this in 1 minute, I'm calling airport police to remove the disruption. And right now," he looked directly at Brianna, "the disruption seems to be the refusal to compromise." Brianna felt cold. The captain wasn't looking at the screaming woman, he was looking at the woman who wouldn't submit. "I see," Brianna said. She picked up her phone. "Who are you calling?" Tiffany sneered. "Your lawyer? Legal aid?" Brianna ignored her. She dialed a number from her contacts. It was a number she hadn't used in years, a number given to her on a scrap of paper by a patient she had nursed through a 3-month coma, a patient who had told her, if you ever find yourself in a room where they won't listen to you, call this. It goes to the private line of the man who owes me his life. Brianna didn't know if it would work. She didn't even know if the number was still active. She pressed the phone to her ear. It rang, once, twice. Hello? A male voice answered, gruff, direct. Mr. Frewley. Sterling, Brianna said, her voice trembling slightly. This is Brianna Washington, from Mount Sinai ICU. You told me to call if I ever had trouble. There was a pause. Then the voice softened, instantly commanding. Brianna, the woman who saved my brother. I remember. Where are you? What's wrong? I'm on Titan Airways Flight 402 to London, she said, looking directly at Tiffany Van Doren. And they are threatening to arrest me because I won't give up the seat I paid for to a woman who says she knows the CEO. Is that so? The voice on the other end went cold. Deadly cold. Do not move, Brianna. Put the phone on speaker. Brianna lowered the phone and pressed the speaker button. She held it up. Captain Miller. The voice from the phone boomed. It wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a gavel striking a desk. The captain froze. He knew that voice. Every employee at Titan Airways knew that voice from the mandatory quarterly briefing videos. This is Arthur Penhaligon, the voice said, chairman of the board for Titan Airways. Captain, why are you threatening my personal guest? The silence that followed was absolute. Tiffany Van Doren's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Connect me to the cockpit phone, Arthur Penhaligon ordered. Now, to say the atmosphere in the cabin shifted would be an understatement. It shattered. Captain Miller's face drained of blood, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the smartphone in Brianna's hand as if it were a live grenade. Mr. Penhaligon? The captain stammered. Sir, I wasn't aware. Clearly, the voice on the speaker cut him off. I'm currently looking at the passenger manifest for Flight 402. I see Brianna Washington in Seat 1A. Paid fare. Checked in. I also see a Tiffany Van Doren in 4A. Is that correct? Tiffany, realizing the ground was crumbling beneath her Gucci loafers, tried to pivot. She lunged toward the phone. Mr. Penhaligon, this is Tiffany Van Doren. I know your wife, Eleanor. We're on the Ghana committee for the Met. This woman is lying. She was aggressive. Mrs. Van Doren. Penhaligon's voice was dry, devoid of any social pleasantries. My wife despises you. She told me last week you tried to expense a personal spa day to the charity account. A gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. Someone in row 3 audibly murmured, "Ouch!" Captain Miller, Penhaligon continued. I am going to make this very simple. You have 2 choices. Choice A, you apologize to Ms. Washington, you ensure she and her daughter are treated like royalty, and you remove the actual disruption from my aircraft immediately. Choice B, you can continue to entertain Mrs. Purst, Van Doren's tantrum, in which case I will have the Port Authority revoke your flight clearance before you reach the runway, and you will be flying cargo planes to Antarctica by Monday. Choose. Captain Miller straightened up, his military training finally overriding his confusion. Understood, sir. Choice A. Good. And put Mrs. Van Doren on the no-fly list. Effective immediately. I don't want her on my planes. Ever. Wait. You can't do that, Tiffany shrieked, her entitlement fracturing into panic. I'm titanium elite. I have 2 million miles. Not anymore, Penhaligon said. Now you have 0. Goodbye, Brianna. Have a safe flight. I'll check in on you when you land. The line went dead. For 3 seconds no one moved. Then Captain Miller turned to Tiffany. His demeanor had completely changed. The deference was gone, replaced by the cold efficiency of a man saving his own skin. "Mrs. Van Doren," he said, "you need to grab your bags." "I am not going anywhere," she screamed, clutching the headrest of Brianna's seat. "This is illegal. I will sue. I will sue all of you. Ms. Jenkins." The captain nodded to the purser. "Call the gate. Tell them we need airport police for an involuntary deplaning. Passenger is belligerent and refusing crew instructions." "With pleasure, Captain. Meist," Jenkins said. There was a glimmer of grim satisfaction in her eyes as she grabbed the interphone. "You're making a mistake," Tiffany yelled, looking around for support. She locked eyes with the tech mogul in row 2. "You saw it. You saw her threaten me." The tech mogul picked up his champagne, looked Tiffany up and down, and calmly put his noise-canceling headphones back on. Within minutes, 2 Port Authority officers boarded the plane. They weren't the gentle customer service agents. These were large men with zip ties and zero patience for drama. "Ma'am, let's go," the first officer said, reaching for Tiffany's arm. "Don't touch me." Tiffany swatted his hand away. That was the final nail. Assaulting an officer, even lightly on an aircraft, was a federal offense. "Okay, turn around," the officer said. He spun her around. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was louder than the engines. "This is a nightmare," Tiffany wailed as they frog-marched her down the aisle. She kicked out, knocking a glass of water off a tray table. "My husband owns Van Doren Logistics." "You're all fired. Fired." As she was dragged past row 1, she locked eyes with Brianna one last time. Tiffany's face was a mask of ruined mascara and pure hatred. "You think you won? You're nothing. You're nobody." Brianna picked up her champagne flute. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just looked at Tiffany with a profound, exhausted pity. "I'm the woman sitting in 1A, Brianna said softly. And then Tiffany Van Doren was gone. The cabin door closed with a heavy, final thud. The engines of the massive Boeing 777 began to hum, a rising vibration that usually signaled the excitement of a journey. But inside the first-class cabin of Flight 402, the atmosphere was brittle. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was terrified. Captain Miller had retreated to the cockpit, likely contemplating the precarious future of his pension. The flight attendants, Sarah and Miss Jenkins, were moving with the frantic, jerky energy of people who knew they had narrowly avoided a firing squad. Brianna sat in 1A, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. She stared at the champagne flute, the bubbles rising in a steady, uncaring stream. She didn't feel like drinking it anymore. She felt drained, scraped hollow by the necessity of defending her own existence. "Mom," Maya's voice was small from seat 1B. "That was, I've never seen you do that." Brianna turned to her daughter. Maya looked scared, but also looked at her mother with a newfound, bewildered awe. "I didn't want to do it, Maya," Brianna sighed, rubbing her temples. "I hate pulling rank. It makes you just as ugly as the people trying to crush you. But sometimes you don't have a choice." Ms. Jenkins approached their seats. The older woman who 20 minutes ago had been trying to coerce Brianna into moving to row 4 now looked like she was approaching a shrine. Her hands were shaking as she placed a warm bowl of mixed nuts on Brianna's tray. "Mrs. Washington," Miss Jenkins said, her voice wavering. I want to apologize." Profusely. We were pressured by Mrs. Van Doren's status, but that is no excuse. We failed to protect you." Brianna looked up. She saw the genuine tears welling in the woman's eyes. This wasn't just fear of the chairman, it was shame. "It's okay," Brianna said softly. "You were doing your job in a difficult situation. But you need to remember, a boarding pass is a contract. It doesn't matter if it's held by a billionaire or a nurse. It's a promise." "Yes, ma'am." Miss Jenkins wiped her eye. Can I ask, how do you know Mr. Penhaligon? We worked here for 20 years and never even heard his voice live. Brianna hesitated. The cabin was quiet. The tech mogul in row 2 had paused his movie. Everyone was listening. 3 years ago, Brianna began, her voice low but carrying in the stillness, a man came into my ICU at Mount Sinai. No ID, just found unconscious in a park, beaten badly. We called him John Doe. He had severe brain swelling. The doctors, they were realistic. They said he wouldn't wake up. They wanted to transfer him to hospice to clear the bed. Sarah, the younger flight attendant, had stopped in the aisle, clutching a bottle of water. She was listening intently. I didn't let them, Brianna continued, looking out the window at the tarmac moving past. I don't know why. I sat with him. My shift ended at 7 p.m., but I'd stay until midnight. I read to him. I talked to him. I washed his hair. I told him about my husband David and how much I missed him. I told him he wasn't allowed to die because dying alone is a tragedy no one deserves. Maya reached across the gap between the seats and took her mother's hand. On the 4th night, Brianna whispered, I saw his finger twitch. The doctor said it was a spasm. I said, no, he's in there. I fought the administration. I made them keep him on the ventilators for 1 more week. And 2 days later, he opened his eyes. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. He wasn't a John Doe, Brianna said. He was Thomas Penhaligon, Arthur's younger brother. He'd been mugged while jogging without his wallet. Arthur had been searching for him for weeks, but because Thomas was listed as a John Doe in a public hospital, no one made the connection. When Arthur finally found him, he found me sitting by his bed reading The Great Gatsby out loud. The cabin was dead silent. Arthur offered me money, Brianna said, shaking her head. Lot of it. I gave it back. I told him I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because I'm a nurse. That's what we do. We watch over people when the lights go out. Brianna took a breath, looking at Mrs. Jenkins. He gave me that phone number and said, if the world ever tries to treat you like you're invisible, you call me. Today was the first time I used it. Nuts. Oh, tummy. Miss Jenkins let out a sob. It was a sharp, jagged sound. She covered her mouth with her hand and turned away, rushing back to the galley. Sarah followed her, tears streaming down her face. From the galley, the sounds of quiet weeping drifted into the cabin. The crew wasn't crying because they were in trouble. They were crying because they realized the magnitude of their mistake. They had judged a woman by her coat and her quiet demeanor, unaware that she carried the moral weight of a saint. The plane taxied onto the runway. The engines roared. As they lifted off, leaving New York behind, Brianna didn't feel triumphant. She just felt tired. She squeezed Maya's hand. Sleep, baby, Brianna said. We have a long way to go. The flight to London was a blur of aggressive hospitality. Captain Miller personally came out of the cockpit 3 times to check on the cabin temperature, looking specifically at Brianna with the desperate hope of a puppy seeking forgiveness. The food was endless caviar, lobster thermidor, warm cookies. Miss Jenkins treated Brianna not like a passenger, but like a fragile glass sculpture. Maya was loving it, watching 3 movies back-to-back and drinking enough sparkling apple juice to float a battleship. But Brianna couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Tiffany Van Doren's face. The sheer, unadulterated venom. Brianna knew how the world worked. Men like Arthur Penhaligon could fix a flight, but they couldn't fix the rot in people's hearts. She worried about the landing. She worried that Tiffany, with her connections and her titanium status, would have lawyers waiting at Heathrow. What Brianna didn't know was that while she was cruising at 35,000 feet, the world below was burning. The tech mogul in row 2, his name was distinct Lars Jensen, the founder of a massive social media platform similar to TikTok. He hadn't just been watching, he had been recording. Before the plane even reached cruising altitude, Lars had uploaded a video. He titled it simply, The Definition of Entitlement versus the Betrayal. Grace, The video showed everything. Tiffany screaming, the insults, Brianna's calm refusal, the arrival of the captain, and then the phone call. The moment Arthur Penhaligon's voice boomed over the speaker, destroying Tiffany's ego in real time, was captured in crystal clear high definition. By the time Flight 402 crossed the Atlantic, the video had 40 million views. The internet did what the internet does best. It went into detective mode. Within 2 hours, Tiffany Van Doren was trending worldwide. But it wasn't just her name. People found her charity galas, her husband's logistics company, her old tweets complaining about poor people ruining first class. The hard karma Brianna had prayed for wasn't waiting for the future. It was happening now. As the plane began its descent into Heathrow, the mood in the cabin changed again. The passengers were waking up, turning on their phones as the Wi-Fi reconnected near the ground. Lars Jensen turned around in his seat. He looked at Brianna. "Mom?" he said. Brianna looked up, wary. "Yes?" "You might want to prepare yourself," Lars said, holding up his phone. "You're famous." "What?" Brianna frowned. "I posted the video," Lars admitted. "I'm sorry. I didn't ask permission. But I couldn't let her get away with lying about you. The world is on your side. Look." He passed his phone back. Brianna saw a news headline from the New York Chronicle. Van Doren Logistics stock plummets as CEO's wife arrested in mid-air meltdown. Another headline, Titan Airways bans socialite for life. We stand with Nurse Washington. Brianna scrolled, her eyes widening. There were thousands of comments. I was a patient of Nurse Washington in 2019. She held my hand when I was scared. This lady is a hero. Tiffany Van Doren fired from the Met Gala committee effective immediately. That phone call was the coldest thing I have ever seen. My wife despises you. Dead. Oh my God, Maya whispered, reading over her shoulder. Mom, you're trending higher than the Super Bowl. Brianna handed the phone back. She felt a strange mix of vindication and nausea. I just wanted to visit David, she whispered. I didn't want a revolution. Sometimes, Lars said gently, you get both. The plane touched down at Heathrow with a smooth bump. The reverse thrusters roared. As they taxied to the gate, the captain came on the PA system. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. Local time is 8:15 a.m. We ask that everyone remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. However, we have a request from ground security. Could all passengers please remain seated to allow Mrs. O. Brianna Washington and her party to deplane first. The cabin erupted into applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was cheering. The businessmen, the weary travelers, even the confused tourists who didn't speak English. They clapped. Brianna hid her face in her hands. Maya was beaming, waving like a princess in a parade. Miss Jenkins opened the cabin door. But instead of the usual jet bridge tunnel, there was a man standing there. He was dressed in an immaculate suit, holding a tablet. Behind him stood 2 British police officers, bobbies, and a woman holding a massive bouquet of white lilies. Mrs. Washington? The man in the suit asked. Yes? Brianna stood up, grabbing her tote bag. I am Geoffrey, Mr. Penhaligon's London attaché, he said with a bow. Mr. Penhaligon sends his regards. He assumed that after such an eventful departure, you might not want to navigate the chaos of customs and the tube. Geoffrey gestured to the tarmac stairs. A car is waiting on the tarmac, madam. We have cleared your immigration status electronically. We are taking you directly to your hotel. And, Brianna hesitated, Mrs. Van Doren. Geoffrey's face remained perfectly neutral, but his eyes danced with a hint of British wit. Mrs. Van Doren is currently being processed by the NYPD back in New York. I believe her husband, Mr. Wesley Robert Van Doren, has already issued a press release stating he is filing for divorce to distance his company from her reprehensible behavior. It seems her platinum card has been declined. Brianna looked at Maya. Maya looked at Brianna. Well, Brianna said, finally allowing a real smile to break through. I guess we're taking the car. They walked out onto the metal stairs of the jet bridge, the cool London air hitting their faces. Below, a sleek black Range Rover was waiting, engine running. And as Brianna reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. She looked up at the grey London sky, thinking of David. We made it, honey, she thought. We made it in style. However, the story wasn't over. As the car pulled away from the plane, Jeffrey turned from the front seat. Mrs. Washington, there is one more thing, he said, his expression turning serious. Mr. Penhaligon didn't just send the car because he likes you. He sent us because he needs to speak with you. Urgently. Brianna's stomach dropped. Why? Is he okay? He is fine, Jeffrey said. But he believes that your encounter with Mrs. Van Duren wasn't an accident. He thinks you were targeted. And he thinks he knows why. The car sped up, merging onto the highway towards central London. Brianna looked out the window, the feeling of peace shattering instantly. It wasn't just a seat dispute. It was something else. The interior of the Range Rover was silent, insulated from the noise of the M4 motorway. But Brianna's mind was roaring. She looked at Jeffrey, whose calm British demeanor did little to quell the rising panic in her chest. Targeted, Brianna repeated, her hand instinctively tightening around Maya's arm. What do you mean? I'm a nurse from Brooklyn. Who would target me? Jeffrey opened a leather portfolio on his lap and pulled out a thin file. He handed a printed email to Brianna. Mrs. Washington, 3 weeks ago, you filed a patient safety incident report at Mount Sinai regarding a batch of contaminated saline solution. Do you remember? Brianna nodded slowly. Of course, 3 patients in the ICU went into septic shock simultaneously. I traced it back to the IV bags. They were cloudy. I flagged the lot numbers and shut down the supply room. It was a nightmare, but we caught it before anyone died. Not on. Precisely, Jeffrey said. You saved lives, but you also cost a very specific company a lucrative government contract. The supplier of that saline was a subsidiary of Van Doren Logistics. Brianna's eyes widened. She looked at the paper. It was an internal email from Robert Van Doren to his chief of operations. The subject line read, "The Washington Problem." The text was short and chilling. This nurse, B. Washington is flagging the Phase 2 shipments. If the FDA gets wind of this recall, we lose the tri-state contract. Get her credibility destroyed. I don't care how. And make sure she knows her place. I see she's flying Titan to London next week. Fix it so she doesn't make that flight. Give her seat to Tiffany. She needs a holiday anyway. Brianna felt the blood drain from her face. She dropped the paper as if it were burning. He tried to cancel my ticket. He did more than that, Jeffrey explained, his voice grim. He used his platinum status to override your reservation in the system. He manually assigned seat 1A to his wife, Tiffany, assuming the airline's computer would simply bump you the lower value passenger 2 economy or off the flight entirely without explanation. It happens all the time. But it didn't happen, Maya whispered, looking at her mother with horror. No, Jeffrey said, because you, Mrs. Washington, checked in online exactly 24 hours in advance. You secured the digital boarding pass before his override fully processed. The system glitched, creating a duplicate record. You both had 1A. He sent his wife to the airport, thinking he had successfully humiliated you by stealing your vacation. Instead, he sent her into a trap of his own making. Brianna looked out the window at the grey London skyline. The anger that had been simmering since the airport suddenly cooled into something harder, something solid. He wanted to punish me for doing my job, Brianna said quietly. He wanted to take this trip away from me. This trip to see David. He is a petty, vindictive man, Jeffrey agreed. And now, because of viral video, he is a desperate one. The world is looking at his wife, which means they are looking at him. His stock is crashing. The FDA has already announced a raid on his New Jersey warehouse this morning, prompted by the renewed interest in his business practices. The car turned off the highway, winding through the upscale streets of Kensington. Mr. Penalagon believes that Robert Van Doren might try to lash out, Jeffrey continued. He has lost his reputation. His wife is in custody, and his business is collapsing, all because you refuse to move seats. Men like him do not handle defeat well. That is why we are not taking you to the hotel you book. Where are we going? Maya asked, her voice trembling. Jeffrey smiled, a genuine, comforting expression this time. To a private residence owned by the Penalagon estate. It has 24-hour security, a private chef, and is completely off the grid. You are here to grieve your husband, Mrs. Washington. Arthur is determined to ensure you do so in peace. They pulled up to a massive townhouse with wrought iron gates. Security guards were already standing at the entrance. As Brianna stepped out of the car, she felt a wave of exhaustion hit her, but also a strange sense of fortitude. Robert Van Doren had tried to break her. He had tried to use his wealth as a weapon to erase her, but he had forgotten the one thing Brianna had learned in 20 years of working the ICU. You can scare someone who looks death in the face for a living. Jeffrey, Brianna asked, pausing at the door. Yes, madam. Does Robert Van Doren know I'm here? No, Jeffrey said. He thinks you are at the Holiday Inn. We have encouraged that belief. Brianna nodded. Good. Let him chase ghosts. I have a husband to visit. Not. And Dob. The next morning, London was draped in a thick, wet fog. It was the kind of weather that felt heavy, perfect for secrets and sorrow. Brianna and Maya sat in the back of a black town car, driving south toward Brixton. They were dressed in black. Brianna held a bouquet of white lilies, David's favorite. For the last 24 hours they had been shielded from the world. They hadn't turned on the TV. They hadn't checked social media. They had eaten a quiet dinner prepared by a chef who moved like a shadow, and they had slept in beds that felt like clouds. But now, the reality of the trip was setting in. Do you remember him? Brianna asked softly, looking at Maya. Maya twisted a ring on her finger, David's old wedding band, which she wore on a chain around her neck. Bits and pieces. I remember his laugh, and the smell of sawdust. He always smelled like wood. David had been a carpenter. A good one. He had built the crib Maya slept in. He had built the life they had in Brooklyn before cancer took him apart, piece by piece, leaving Brianna to rebuild the world alone. He loved you so much, Brianna said, her voice catching. He worked so hard so we could have a good life. He would have been so mad at that woman on the plane. Maya laughed, a wet, teary sound. He would have thrown her luggage out the window himself. The car slowed down. They pulled up to the gates of the cemetery. It was an old Victorian graveyard, filled with crumbling angels and moss-covered stones. Brianna stepped out. The air was cold. She walked through the gates, her boots crunching on the gravel. She knew exactly where he was. She had visited this spot on Google Earth 1,000 times. They walked in silence for 10 minutes until they reached a small, modest headstone under an oak tree. David Washington, beloved husband and father. Built with love. Ta! Brianna fell to her knees. The damp grass soaked through her tights, but she didn't care. She laid the lilies against the cold stone. She traced the letters of his name with her fingers. Hi, baby, she whispered. I'm sorry it took so long. Tickets are expensive. Maya knelt beside her, resting her head on Brianna's shoulder. They cried together, not the hysterical crying of fresh grief, but the deep, aching release of 5 years of holding it together. Brianna told him about the promotion she didn't get. She told him about Maya's college applications. She told him about the lonely nights and the hard shifts. And she told him about the plane. "I stood up for us, David," she whispered. "I didn't let them push me around. You always told me, Bea, don't let nobody make you feel small." Well, I was big yesterday. I was 10 feet tall. They stayed for an hour until the cold began to seep into their bones. As they stood up to leave, Brianna felt lighter. The weight she had been carrying, the exhaustion, the fear, the anger, had been left in the grass. She kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the stone. "I love you. I'll be back. I promise it won't be 5 years this time." Sam, but thunder above. As they walked back to the car, Jeffrey was waiting by the open door. He looked serious. He held a tablet in his hand. "Mrs. Washington," he said. "Pro. I apologize for interrupting the moment, but Mr. Penhaligon insisted you see this. It just happened." Brianna wiped her eyes and looked at the screen. It was a live news feed from New York. The headline flashed in bold red, "Breaking news, FBI raids Vendor in logistics." The camera footage showed agents in windbreakers carrying boxes out of a glass office building. And then the shot changed. It showed a man disheveled, wearing a suit but no tie, being led out in handcuffs. He was shielding his face from the cameras, but the Chiron identified him. CEO Robert Van Doren, arrested on charges of fraud and reckless endangerment. The reporter's voice was breathless. "Following the viral incident aboard Titan Airways Flight 402, whistleblowers have come forward alleging a massive cover-up regarding faulty medical supplies. Sources say the investigation was fast-tracked after documents were leaked linking the CEO to a targeted harassment campaign against a key witness, the very passenger his wife attempted to remove from the flight." Brianna stared at the screen. "Karma," Maya whispered. "Hard, fast karma." Jeffrey tapped the screen to show another image. It was Tiffany Van Doren, looking haggard, leaving a police precinct. She was swarmed by paparazzi. No one was helping her. No private car was waiting. She looked small. Mr. Penhaligon has also filed a civil suit against them for damages to Titan Airways' reputation," Jeffrey added. "He intends to donate the settlement to the Nursing Scholarship Fund at Mount Sinai." "In your name." Brianna looked up at Jeffrey, then back at the cemetery gate. She thought about Robert Van Doren, sitting in a cell, wondering how his empire had crumbled. He had thought he could erase a nurse. He had thought 1A was just a seat. He had forgotten that the people who hold the world together, the nurses, the mothers, the workers, are the ones with the real power. They just rarely choose to use it. "Thank you, Jeffrey," Brianna said. "Tell Arthur. Tell him thank you." "I will," Jeffrey said. "Now, shall we go? I believe there is a high tea waiting for you at the Dorchester. It is as Sir Winter Martivist Penhaligon says you cannot come to London without having proper scones." Brianna smiled. She took Maya's hand. "Let's go get those scones, baby," she said. The scones at the Dorchester were, as promised, life-changing. Brianna sat in a velvet armchair, watching Maya slather clotted cream onto a warm pastry with a look of pure, unadulterated joy. For the first time in years, the lines of worry on Maya's face were gone, smoothed out by the realization that her mother wasn't just a survivor, she was a force of nature. They spent 3 more days in London. They rode the London Eye, they walked along the Thames, and they ate fish and chips wrapped in paper. They didn't see a single paparazzi. Jeffrey and the security team remained invisible, but at the present, a silent shield ensuring that the only thing Brianna had to worry about was whether to have Earl Grey or English breakfast. When they finally boarded the flight back to New York, Flight 403, the experience was different. There were no screaming socialites. There was no tension. As Brianna walked onto the plane, the entire flight crew stopped what they were doing. The purser, a different woman this time, nodded respectfully. "Welcome back, Mrs. Washington. Seat 1A is ready for you." Brianna sat down. This time, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt like she belonged, not because she had money, but because she had earned her space in the world. Back in New York, the storm had settled, but the landscape had changed forever. Brianna returned to work at Mount Sinai 2 days later. She expected whispers. She expected stares. What she got was a standing ovation. As she walked into the ICU, doctors, nurses, and even the janitorial staff stopped and clapped. It wasn't about the viral fame. It was about the fact that one of their own had stood up to the kind of people who treat the working class like furniture, and she had won. Robert Van Doren was denied bail. The investigation into his logistics company revealed years of cutting corners, bribing officials, and knowingly shipping substandard medical supplies. The empire he had built on arrogance was dismantled brick by brick. Tiffany Van Doren avoided jail time by taking a plea deal for the assault on the officer, but her punishment was perhaps more fitting for a woman of her vanity: 500 hours of community service. By a twist of fate, or perhaps a nudge from a certain chairman of the board, her service was assigned to the sanitation department at JFK Airport. The woman who refused sit in row 4 was now emptying the trash cans in Terminal 4. But the real ending of this story isn't about revenge. It's about legacy. 6 months later, Brianna stood on a podium in the atrium of Mount Sinai. Arthur Penhaligon stood beside her, looking healthy and sharp in a charcoal suit. "It is my honor," Arthur announced to the crowd of press and hospital staff, "to launch the Brianna Washington Nursing Scholarship. This fund, endowed with the settlement money from the defamation suit against the Van Dorens, will provide full tuition for 20 nursing students every year. Specifically, students from underrepresented communities who have the heart but not the funds to serve." Brianna stepped to the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Maya, now in her first year of college, beaming in the front row. She saw the young nurses who looked up to her. "My husband David used to say that you can tell the measure of a person by how they treat someone who can do nothing for them," Brianna said, her voice steady and strong. "For a long time I thought that meant I had to be quiet. I thought dignity meant silence. But I learned at 30,000 feet that sometimes dignity means making a noise. It means holding your ticket and saying, 'I am here. I matter. And I am not moving.'" The applause was deafening. Brianna looked up, past the atrium glass toward the sky. She thought of the cold leather of Seat 1A. She thought of the fear she felt when Tiffany screamed. And she thought of the phone call that changed everything. She wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just a mother. She was Brianna Washington, and she had finally arrived. And that is the incredible story of Brianna Washington. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest people in the room hold the most power, and that true class isn't about what seat you're in, it's about how you treat the people around you. Brianna didn't just fight for a seat, she fought for her dignity, and in doing so she exposed a massive injustice that saved countless lives. Karma didn't just hit, it struck with precision. What would you have done if you were in Brianna's shoes? Would you have moved to row 4 to keep the peace, or would you have made that phone call? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know if you've ever had to deal with a Tiffany in your own life. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story about justice, drama, and real-life karma hitting back. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stand their ground. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.